The rain came down in heavy sheets that night, the kind of relentless storm that seemed to wash away everything but pain. Inside the aging halls of Crestwood County Hospital, Nurse Caroline Hayes moved like a shadow, quiet, weary, but determined. It was almost midnight, the end of a 16-hour shift, and her bones ached with the kind of tiredness only the soul could recognize. Still, she pressed forward, offering weary smiles and comfort to strangers who clung to hope between the beeping monitors and harsh fluorescent lights. Then she saw him, just beyond the sliding glass doors, a man hunched against the cold stone wall, soaked to the skin, his clothes tattered, his arms wrapped tight around his chest as if trying to hold something broken together. Most would have passed him by, but not Caroline. Something in her heart whispered, "He's not just another drifter." So she pushed open the door, stepped into the storm, and knelt beside a man who would change her life forever. Inside the warm cocoon of the examination bay, the world outside faded into a distant blur of thunder and flickering streetlights. Caroline moved quickly, wrapping a thermal blanket around the trembling man's shoulders. The rain had soaked him completely, and his lips quivered as if trying to form words he hadn't spoken in years. "I'm Carolyn," she said gently, placing her stethoscope against his chest. "I need to listen to your heart." The beats were erratic, uneven, a sign of something more than just the cold. But it wasn't just the rhythm of his heart that troubled her. His hands, when she took them to check his pulse, were soft, not the calloused, cracked hands she'd expected from someone living on the streets. And his posture, even in pain, held a strange kind of grace. It was as if this man had known another life, a better one. Still, none of that mattered now. Right now, he was her patient. She glanced over her shoulder when she heard a voice dripping with sarcasm from the corridor. "Let him sleep it off. Probably just wants a warm bed and a handout." Caroline stiffened but didn't reply. She leaned closer to the man, her voice a quiet refuge amidst the clamor. "Don't listen to them," she said. "We'll take care of you." His eyelids fluttered open. His voice, when it came, was barely more than a whisper. "You're the first person who's looked at me without judgment." Carolyn swallowed the lump in her throat. "You're not invisible here." As she slipped a pillow beneath his head and wrapped a blood pressure cuff around his arm, something unspoken passed between them. Not love, not yet, but a connection. The kind that anchors you when the rest of the world tries to wash you away. The hospital had quieted slightly by 2 a.m., but Caroline's mind remained restless. The man, still a mystery, rested now under a fresh blanket, his heartbeat more stable, his breath deeper. She'd done all she could medically for the moment, but something tugged at her chest as she glanced at the vending machines in the staff hallway. Her fingers fumbled through her purse. A crumpled dollar bill. 2 quarters. That was all she had until payday. She bit her lip, staring at the machine's glowing buttons, chips, cookies, juice. She chose the cheapest thing as she could find, a packet of crackers and a small bottle of apple juice. A quiet sigh left her as the items dropped. This wasn't just for him. It was a reminder of dignity, of kindness, of humanity. Even when the world didn't offer much, she still could. Back at the exam bay, the man was stirring, blinking through the haze of exhaustion. Carolyn placed the crackers and juice on the tray beside him. "You need something in your stomach," she said, her voice soft. "You're dehydrated, blood sugar's low." He looked at the offering, then at her, his eyes glistening. You paid for this?" She nodded. "It's not much." He reached for the juice but paused, voice cracking. "You didn't have to do that." Carolyn helped lift the bottle to his lips. "Everyone deserves a little kindness," she murmured, "even when it's hard." As he sipped slowly, his eyes never left hers. And in that quiet moment, it was as if the walls of the sterile hospital melted away. They were just 2 people, one weary from life, the other holding on with threadbare hope. By the time the first soft light of dawn painted the hospital windows in pale gold, Carolyn was running on fumes. Her back ached, her feet throbbed, and her eyes stung from exhaustion. But she didn't care. Before clocking out, she made one last stop. She walked slowly to Bay 17, the small cubicle where she'd left the man resting. The curtain was drawn halfway. Her chest fluttered with a quiet hope. Maybe he'd finally be awake enough to speak, to tell her his name. But as she pulled the curtain back, the bed was empty. neatly folded on the cot were the hospital scrubs she had found for him. The IV line was removed. His jacket, battered and soaked the night before, was gone. So was he. Caroline froze. She checked the hallway, the restroom, even the vending machine alcove. Nothing. He's gone? She whispered, confused. A nurse walking past offered a shrug. They always disappear before billing shows up. Carolyn ignored the jab. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the curtain. He was still weak. He couldn't have just walked out on his own. He probably wasn't as sick as you thought, someone muttered behind her. Or maybe he just didn't want help. But Caroline knew better. She had felt the tremor in his pulse, heard the rasp in his lungs, seen the pain in his eyes. Still he'd left. Without a name, without a goodbye. That empty bed haunted her all the way home. As she climbed the stairs to her tiny apartment, her shoulders sagged with fatigue and something deeper, a sadness she couldn't explain. In the corner of her living room stood a photograph of her mother, framed beside a stack of unpaid medical bills. She sank into the couch, the memory of his soft thank you echoing in her mind. Somewhere out there, he was walking under the same sunrise. And she couldn't help but whisper a silent prayer for him and for the strength to keep going. The days blurred together like watercolor bleeding on paper, shift after shift, bill after bill, and no sign of the man who vanished from Bay 17. Caroline tried not to let it consume her, but every time she passed the corner where he once lay, her eyes lingered. Every time the ER doors slid open, her breath hitched just a little. She didn't even know his name. Meanwhile, life didn't pause. Her mother's condition was stable, but the medication cost more each month. The insurance only covered so much. Carolyn had picked up 2 extra shifts a week, leaving barely enough time to sleep. Her fridge was nearly empty. She skipped meals more often than not, living on instant noodles and lukewarm coffee. 3 weeks later, just after a draining 12-hour night shift, she made a simple mistake, one number, one misplaced decimal on a patient's chart. It would have been easy to correct under normal circumstances. But Westridge Memorial had just introduced a zero-tolerance policy for medical errors. The administrators were cracking down, more worried about liability than humanity. The verdict came fast, a formal reprimand, and a temporary 15% pay cut. Caroline sat alone in the break room, her hands trembling as she read the email. Her chest ached, not from anger, but from despair. That 15% was the difference between keeping her mother's next prescription filled or not. "I'm so sorry," whispered Alicia, one of the few nurses who had always been kind. She touched Caroline's shoulder gently. "This place, it's not fair." Caroline nodded, unable to speak. She didn't trust herself to. Her phone buzzed. The name on the screen made her stomach turn. Graham. She hadn't seen or spoken to her ex-boyfriend in months. Not since he'd made it clear her struggles weren't worth his time. And yet, here he was, demanding a meeting outside the hospital entrance. She didn't want to go, but something told her she had to. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the way her mother's medicine bottles rattled emptily on the shelf. Or maybe it was just hope that anyone might care. What she got instead with Aisha was a proposition, a cruel one. "Come back to me," Graham said, leaning smugly against his glossy luxury car. "You need help. I have it. Simple." Caroline crossed her arms. "What's the price?" "No price, just a chance to fix your life. My father's on the hospital board. I can make things easier for you, for your mom. But you need to stop pretending you're fine." The way he said it, pretending, it crawled under her skin like ice. "And if I say no," she asked quietly. He smirked. "Then you'll be alone. And kindness? That doesn't pay the bills." She walked away, jaw clenched, fury boiling beneath her skin. But Graham's words echoed in her ears as she returned to her mother's apartment. Kindness doesn't pay the bills. And deep down, she was starting to believe he was right. The next morning, Caroline woke early, her sleep patchy and restless. She dragged herself from bed and wrapped herself in an old cardigan, the kind with fraying sleeves and a coffee stain near the collar. The apartment was cold, the air heavy with the quiet fatigue of worn-out dreams. She shuffled barefoot across the faded linoleum floor to the front door and opened it with a weary sigh. The hallway outside was dimly lit, the overhead fluorescent flickering like it was as tired as she felt. On the ground lay a small pile of mail. Most of it was junk. Another overdue notice from the electric company, a coupon flyer for a pizza place she hadn't ordered from in months. And then something different, a plain, unmarked envelope. No return address, just her name typed neatly on the front. Caroline Moore. She stirred at it, brow furrowed. Her fingers hesitated before she slid one under the flap, heart thudding. Not out of fear, but from a strange, irrational hope. Inside was a single slip of paper, a cashier's check. She blinked. $50,000. Her breath caught in her throat. For a second, the world tilted. The kitchen floor felt further away, like she was floating. She sat down heavily at the table, her hands trembling. There was a note, printed, simple. For your mother's care. Thank you for your kindness. A friend. A friend? She stared at the words, reading them over and over until the letters blurred. It didn't say who, no name, no clue, just a friend. She flipped the check over. It was drawn from a reputable national bank. Everything looked legitimate. She called the bank, her voice shaky. Yes, ma'am, the woman on the other end said politely. It's real, it's valid. It was issued this morning. Tears pricked her eyes. She thought of her mother asleep in the next room, her medications dwindling. She thought of the stack of bills she'd hidden in a drawer, pretending they didn't exist. And then she thought, him, the man from the ER, the one with soft hands, too soft to belong to someone living on the street, the one who vanished without a name. Could it be? She didn't want to believe it. It was too impossible, too much like something out of one of those movies her mother used to love. But still, she couldn't shake the feeling. That man, his eyes, the way he looked at her, he had seen her, and now someone, somewhere, had seen her again. Carolyn sat alone in that small kitchen, the early light filtering through the blinds, turning the edge of the check golden. And for the first time in a long time, she cried, but not from fear, not from grief, not from the constant weight of not having enough. She cried because for once, there was a little more than just enough. There was hope. 3 days had passed since the check arrived, and Caroline still couldn't bring herself to deposit it. It sat in her top drawer, beneath her socks, next to a carefully folded letter she couldn't bear to throw away. Her mind was a whirlwind of questions. Who? Why? How did they know? Each time she thought of cashing the check, her hand froze. Was it really for her? Could it be a mistake? Was someone watching her, testing her? She barely slept. At work, she wandered through her shifts like a ghost, her thoughts somewhere far from IV bags and discharge forms. Until the afternoon, a nurse named Nina tapped her shoulder in the break room and handed her something. This came for you, she said, her voice tinged with curiosity. From admin. Caroline looked down. It was a formal envelope, thick, elegant, sealed with gold embossing. Inside was an invitation. The Westchester Grace Foundation. Annual Gala. A celebration of generosity and the spirit of care. You are cordially invited. Your attendance has been personally requested, and all arrangements have been made on your behalf. Her mouth went dry. She'd heard of the gala, of course. It was one of those glittering affairs for board members and donors, people who wore custom tuxedos and drank champagne that cost more than her monthly rent. Nurses didn't go to those, not unless they were working security or bussing tables. Are you going? Nina asked, peeking over her shoulder. Caroline shook her head slowly. I didn't even know I was invited. Well, someone paid for you to be, Nina said, eyes twinkling. And not just the entry ticket. Look at the bottom. Caroline turned the invitation over. There was a handwritten note tucked inside the folds. Formal wear will be waiting for you at the concierge desk. No need to bring anything but yourself. I'll be there if you still remember me. Your friend. Her breath caught. Him. It had to be him. But why now? What could possibly be waiting for her at a black tie fundraiser surrounded by strangers in sequins? Later that night, Caroline stood in front of her mirror, staring at herself in the soft blue evening gown that had indeed been waiting for her at the hotel's concierge desk. It fit like it had been tailored just for her. The fabric shimmered gently with every breath she took, like moonlight across water. She didn't recognize the woman in the reflection. She looked strong, elegant, worthy. With trembling hands, she tucked the invitation into her clutch, took one last glance at her mother, resting peacefully in her chair with the television on low, and whispered, "I'll be back soon, Mama." Then she stepped into the unknown. The hotel loomed like a dream, all glowing chandeliers and soft classical music echoing down the marble halls. Waiters passed with silver trays, laughter tinkled like crystal, and for a moment Caroline felt like she'd walked straight into a fairy tale. She wandered slowly through the crowd, unsure of where to go, unsure of what to expect, until the MC took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed over the crowd, "we are honored tonight to be joined by a guest who prefers to let his actions speak louder than words. A man whose recent anonymous donation helped cover the treatment costs for over a dozen patients, including a nurse's ailing mother. Please welcome Mr. Nathaniel Brooks." A hush fell. The ballroom doors opened slowly, and there he was, not in rags, not in damp hospital scrubs, but in a tailored tuxedo, polished shoes, his dark hair swept neatly to the side, the same eyes, the same quiet intensity. The man from the ER, no longer a mystery. Carolyn's knees went weak. The crowd parted like the sea as he walked directly toward her, and when he finally reached her, Nathaniel didn't say a word. He simply bowed his head slightly, took her hand in his, and smiled. The music faded into a hush, but Caroline barely heard it. Her pulse throbbed in her ears like a drumbeat. The room had fallen away. There was only Nathaniel, no longer the man in rags, but a vision of elegance, standing tall in the heart of a ballroom full of power and prestige. He still held her hand gently but with purpose, as though anchoring her in a storm. "Can we step outside for a moment?" he asked softly, his voice just as she remembered, quiet, smooth, carrying that same unspoken depth. She nodded, unable to find her voice, and let him lead her through the side corridor of the hotel. They exited onto a terrace overlooking the city, where the soft night breeze lifted the hem of her gown and played with loose strands of her hair. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The lights of downtown glittered beneath them. The sky stretched above like a velvet painting, brushed with silver stars. "I never thought I'd see you again," Carolyn whispered. Nathaniel turned to her, his gaze tender, almost reverent. "I never stopped thinking about you." She drew in a breath. "That night, I wasn't sure you even remembered my name." He gave a soft, rueful smile. "I remembered everything. Your voice, your eyes, the way you knelt beside me like I was worth saving, even when no one else would look at me." Caroline's throat tightened. But why the disguise? Why pretend to be homeless? He hesitated, then turned to lean on the balcony railing, his voice lower now, thick with emotion. "My name is Nathaniel Brooks. I own a company called Everwin Holdings. Real estate, healthcare tech, logistics. It's my father's legacy, and mine, now that he's passed." Caroline's eyes widened. Everwin. She'd seen the name on buildings, medical grants, scholarships. Nathaniel continued, "A year ago, I found out that someone in my company, someone I trusted, had embezzled nearly $10 million. Money meant for funding patient care programs, affordable housing, things I believed in." He turned back to her, eyes dark with quiet pain. "When I tried to expose him, others turned on me. Board members, business partners. They cared more about preserving reputation than doing what was right. I was isolated, betrayed. I stepped away from everything. Took a sabbatical, I told them. But in truth, I left. I shaved, packed a single bag, and disappeared." Carolyn stared at him, heart aching. You lived on the streets?" "Not for long," he admitted. "Mostly in shelters, couch surfing with the few friends I had left. I wanted to see what it felt like to be on the other side. Not just as a billionaire playing poor, but really watching how people treated those with nothing." "And what did you find?" she asked quietly. He looked at her with an intensity that stole her breath. "I found you." Carolyn's eyes shimmered. She remembered the vending machine crackers, the whispers behind the curtain, the scornful nurses, and the way he trembled as she offered him warmth. "I didn't know who you were," she said, voice shaking. "I know. That's why it mattered." Nathaniel reached into his jacket and pulled out something small, a folded piece of paper. Carefully, he handed it to her. It was a copy of the note he had written with the check. "For your mother's care. Thank you for your kindness." A friend. I wrote it a dozen times before I mailed it, he confessed. But every version sounded small compared to what you gave me. She stared at it, then back at him. You could have just sent flowers. He laughed softly, the sound full of warmth. I thought of that. But I wanted you to know you weren't forgotten. A long silence stretched between them, heavy with all the words neither had dared say until now. Do you forgive me for not telling you sooner? He asked. Carolyn stepped closer, searching his face. It's not forgiveness you need. It's trust. And do I have it? He asked. She didn't answer with words. Instead, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. His embrace was instant, protective, full of a kind of reverence that made her heart ache in the best way. For the first time in months, she felt safe. I've never done anything like this before, she murmurs against his shoulder. Neither have I, he said with a chuckle. I was always too busy being someone else. When they finally pulled apart, the world felt a little clearer, the air a little lighter. I don't know where this leads, she said. I don't know if it makes sense, but I'd like to find out. His smile was the kind that reached his eyes. That's all I've ever wanted. The city skyline blurred past the car windows as Nathaniel's sleek black sedan pulled up in front of the modest apartment building Caroline called home. She glanced at him, still trying to believe all of it was real. The tuxedo, the gala, the revelation. It felt like she'd walked out of her own life and into a storybook. Except one built not on fantasy, but on everything raw, real, and heartbreakingly human. Are you sure? She asked as he stepped out and opened the passenger door for her. I'm not here to impress your mother, Bishop mother, Nathaniel said with a warm smile. I just want to meet the woman who raised the only person who ever saw me for who I really was. Carolyn's heart fluttered, and she nodded. The apartment was quiet when they stepped inside. The scent of lavender and lemon balm, her mother's favorite, still lingered in the air. Linda Wilson sat in her recliner, legs propped up, her gray hair loosely tied back, eyes tired but alert as ever. She looked up, her expression shifting quickly from surprise to curiosity when she saw the sharply dressed man following Caroline through the doorway. Mom, Caroline said gently, this is Nathaniel. He stepped forward, extending a bouquet of sunflowers and white daisies. I've heard so much about you, Mrs. Wilson, and I wanted to thank you for raising someone with a heart big enough to save a stranger. Linda took the bouquet with trembling hands. My daughter doesn't talk about herself much, she said with a soft smile, but I know what she's capable of. I just didn't expect you to come dressed like Prince Charming. Nathaniel laughed, crouching slightly to meet her eyes. There's a story behind that, a long one. But tonight I'd rather just be the man grateful to you both. Linda looked between the two of them, her smile widening. Are you the one behind the check? Nathaniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. It wasn't enough, but I hoped it would help. Tears sprang to Linda's eyes. She pressed a hand over her heart. You don't know what it meant to us. That kindness. It was more than money. It was hope. Carolyn knelt beside her mother, hugging her close. We're okay now, Mom. You're going to get the care you need, and I'm not alone in this anymore. Linda held on to both of them for a long moment, her frail arms full of strength and silent gratitude. Then, just as they stood to prepare dinner together, Caroline chopping vegetables, Nathaniel setting the table, Linda humming along to an old Nat King Cole tune from the record player, there was a knock at the door. Caroline frowned. I wasn't expecting anyone. She opened it to find a man in a crisp gray suit holding a leather portfolio. He looked surprised to see her, but quickly smiled. Miss Wilson, I'm here from Brooks Foundation Legal Services. Mr. Brooks, he gestured toward Nathaniel, asked me to bring over the finalized documents. It's all ready for your signature. Carolyn blinked. Documents? Nathaniel walked over, gently taking her hand. I didn't want to say anything until I was sure, but we're establishing a community care initiative under your name, the Caroline Wilson Patient Fund. It will provide emergency support for nurses, patients, and families in crisis, just like yours once was. Her breath caught. You're honoring me? She whispered. I'm honoring what you stand for, he said, and I want you on the board. Carolyn stared at him, then laughed through the tears that sprang to her eyes. I'm a nurse from a tiny apartment with a rusted stove and secondhand curtains, she said. You want me on a board? I want the one person I trust to keep the mission pure. Linda chuckled from behind them. Well, I guess I better start brushing up on how to say my daughter's a founder. As the legal documents were signed and the flowers were placed in a vase, Carolyn sat on the couch, Nathaniel beside her, and felt something she hadn't known in years. Security. Not the kind money brought, but the kind born of love, truth, and the courage to do what's right. She reached for his hand, fingers threading with his. The morning sun painted the city in warm golds and muted blues as Nathaniel parked outside a quiet tree-lined neighborhood, far from the hospital buzz, far from Caroline's cramped apartment. The air was calm here, carrying only the whisper of leaves rustling and the distant chirping of birds. It was the kind of street where kids rode bikes until the porch lights came on and neighbors waved from their lawns. Caroline looked out the window in confusion. Why are we here? Nathaniel simply smiled and stepped out of the car. He walked around to open her door with the same ease he had the first night they met, when he was in rags and her kindness was the only shelter from the storm. Now, months later, the roles had changed in ways neither of them could have imagined. And yet, at their core, they were still just two people trying to heal. She took his hand and stepped onto the quiet sidewalk. I want to show you something, he said, leading her up a cobblestone path toward a charming two-story house with white shutters, a wraparound porch, and flower beds already blooming with tulips and lavender. A sold sign leaned awkwardly near the fence. Caroline paused, eyes wide. Nathaniel, what is this? He handed her a small antique key, worn but polished, cool against her palm. This, he said softly, is your new home. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. Mine? Ours, he corrected gently. I bought this house with you in mind, with your mom in mind, a place with space, a sunroom for her plants, a cozy kitchen for you, and quiet enough for peace to finally settle. Caroline was speechless. Her fingers tightened around the key as tears welled in her eyes. You didn't have to. No, he interrupted, cupping her cheek with his hand. But I wanted to. Not because I think you need to be saved, but because I want to build something with you. Something real. And it starts here. He stepped back and opened the front door. Inside, the house was flooded with natural light. Hardwood floors stretched beneath her feet, and the scent of freshly cut wood lingered in the air. The living room had bay windows that looked out onto the tree-lined street. There was even a fireplace, rustic and inviting. I had the upstairs guest room outfitted with safety rails for your mom, Nathaniel said, his voice low, reverent. And the main room downstairs has enough space for a little writing desk. I remember you once mentioned you used to journal before life got too busy. Carolyn wandered deeper into the house, her hand brushing the kitchen counters, eyes wide with disbelief. It wasn't extravagant. It wasn't marble floors and imported chandeliers. It was thoughtful. It was safe. It was home. You remembered that? She asked, turning to him. I remember everything about that night, Nathaniel said. The way you didn't flinch when I looked like I had nothing. The way you spent your last dollars on crackers and juice just to keep a stranger going. I told myself then, if I ever made it back to myself, to the life I left behind, I'd come back for you. She walked toward him, her expression soft with something far deeper than gratitude. Her voice shook. You didn't just come back for me, Nathaniel. You built something I didn't even know I was allowed to dream about. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. I wanted to wait, he said, but it doesn't feel right. She opened it slowly. It was a hand-drawn sketch of the backyard, with a garden plotted out, and two children's swing sets drawn near the edge of the lawn. A blush crept into her cheeks. You're thinking that far ahead? He chuckled nervously. Too soon? Carolyn laughed, tears falling freely now. She wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his shoulder. No, she whispered. It's not too soon at all. It had been a week since Nathaniel handed Caroline the key to the house, and her heart hadn't quite caught up with her reality. Each morning she woke up to sunbeams painting the bedroom walls in gold, the scent of brewing coffee floating through the air from the cozy kitchen Nathaniel had stocked with her favorite teas and spices. Her mother, now comfortably settled into her sunlit room upstairs, had taken to humming again, soft, familiar tunes from Caroline's childhood that filled the home with warmth. But despite the peace, something unsettled stirred inside her. On this particular afternoon, Caroline sat at the long wooden kitchen table with her elbows resting on a thick folder. It contained forms, schedules, and a proposal from the hospital's board. Ramesh, one of the directors who had quietly championed her over the years, had called the previous day with news she didn't expect. "We want to offer you a new role," he had said. "Director of the Compassionate Care Initiative, a full-time position. You'd manage the very fund Nathaniel endowed, the one helping patients without insurance, coordinating their care, guiding them through follow-up services. It would be yours to lead, Carolyn." It was more than a promotion, it was purpose. And yet it would mean stepping away from the nursing floor, from direct patient care. She ran her fingers over the top page. Her heart tugged in two directions. How do you say goodbye to the work that defined you? The work that had pulled you through the darkest seasons? The sound of the front door opening broke her thoughts. Nathaniel stepped in, briefcase in hand, his tie loosened and a knowing smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I saw the light on through the window. You're still at it?" She nodded slowly. "I can't make sense of it. I've dreamed of a chance like this. And now that it's here, I'm terrified." Nathaniel set his briefcase down and walked over. "You're not scared of the job, Caroline. You're scared to let go of what you've always known." "I guess I thought healing had to look like a hospital bed and an IV line," she murmured. "But maybe it's also in how we make people feel seen, heard, cared for, even when they think they don't deserve it." Nathaniel reached down and covered her hand with his. "That's the heart of everything you've ever done. And if you choose this role, you'll just be giving that heart more reach. You're not stepping away from helping people. You're scaling it." She met his eyes, gratitude swelling in her chest. "You always know what to say." Before he could respond, the doorbell rang. They both turned. Caroline stood, wiping her palms on her jeans, and walked toward the door. She opened it slowly and froze. Standing on the porch was a man she hadn't seen in years. Tall, graying, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. A small, weary smile formed on his lips. "Caroline Washington," he said. "It's been a long time." Her breath caught. "Dad?" He looked down, guilt washing over his features like a tide. "I heard about your mom's condition, about the fundraiser. I wanted to come, but I didn't know if I'd be welcome." The world tilted slightly. Nathaniel, sensing the gravity of the moment, stayed back, silent. Caroline's voice was tight. "You left. You said you couldn't handle the stress, the bills, the nights sitting up, wondering if Mom would make it." "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "And I live with that regret every day. But I'm here now, and I want to make things right, if you'll let me." She didn't know what to say. Old wounds opened without warning, but so did something else, a strange flicker of relief. A part of her had always hoped he'd return someday, if only to say those words. "I don't know what right looks like," she whispered. "But you can start by visiting her." He nodded, eyes shining with emotion. "Thank you." As Caroline stepped aside to let her father in, Nathaniel gently touched her shoulder, a steadying presence in the whirlwind. The day she had feared, the day she'd have to choose between the life she had and the life she could build, had finally arrived. Caroline stood just inside the hallway, listening to the distant hum of her father's voice upstairs as he spoke gently with her mother. Through the half-open door, she caught glimpses of the two of them, her mother propped up on pillows, eyes wide with surprise, and her father seated beside her, hands folded nervously in his lap. It had been 15 years since he walked out. 15 years since Carolyn stood at the window, watching him disappear down the street with nothing more than a suitcase and silence left behind. And now here he was, older, humbled, and perhaps changed. Nathaniel's quiet footsteps approached behind her, his presence grounding. "Did she let him in?" he asked softly. Carolyn nodded. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just said, "Well, it's about time." Nathaniel chuckled lightly. "Sounds like her." They stood in silence for a moment before Caroline whispered, "How do you forgive someone who walked away when you needed them most?" Nathaniel was quiet for a beat. Then, "You forgive them the same way you love someone after you've seen them at their worst, by choosing to believe that people can be more than the pain they caused." Carolyn's throat tightened. She looked at him then, really looked at him. How did I get here? From empty vending machines and double shifts to this? Nathaniel smiled and reached for her hand. You didn't wait for a miracle, Carolyn. You were one. Later that evening, the house settled into a peaceful quiet. Her father had left, promising to return tomorrow, with groceries no less. Her mother had drifted to sleep, cheeks flushed from the emotional day, and Caroline now sat on the porch swing beside Nathaniel, wrapped in an old blanket, gazing at the moonlight painting silver streaks across the lawn. I've decided, she said suddenly. Nathaniel turned to her. The director role? She nodded. I'm going to take it, but I want to do it differently. I want to be on the floor once a week, still see patients, still teach. I don't want to lose that part of me. Nathaniel's smile was slow, proud. That sounds like the most Caroline decision ever. She nudged his shoulder with hers. And you, any big decisions coming? He paused, then stood, suddenly pulling something small from the inside of his jacket pocket. A box. Her breath caught. I gave this to you once in the middle of a storm, he said, kneeling beside her. Back when I was too broken to believe in love again. But now, I want to give it to you in the calm, when everything feels possible. He opened the box. The same ring, but this time it wasn't just a gesture, it was a promise. Caroline stared at it, tears brimming. Nathaniel's voice softened. Will you marry me, Caroline? Not out of gratitude or circumstance, but because we're better together. She didn't hesitate. Yes, she breathed, tears slipping down her cheeks. He slid the ring onto her finger, and for the first time in a very long time, everything felt right. Epilogue. A house built on kindness. A year later, the home on Meadowbrook Lane looked different. Not in structure, but in spirit. The front garden was full of lavender and sunflowers, planted by Caroline and her mother, who now walked with a cane and bright eyes. The kitchen smelled of bread baking. The upstairs guest room had turned into a tiny nursery, the walls pale yellow, the crib painted by Nathaniel himself. Caroline had become a quiet force of change at the hospital, spearheading programs that reached thousands. Patients without family found comfort in her team. Nurses overworked and underpaid found advocacy in her voice. At the dedication of the hospital's new wing, she stood beside Nathaniel as they cut the ribbon. A plaque behind them reading, the Emma Grace Center for Healing is where kindness is the first medicine. When asked why they named it after someone no one knew, Caroline smiled. She was the nurse who first believed in me, and sometimes that's all it takes to change a life.